Hi, I'm Dr. Cynthia Blanco, and in 2016, I earned the PhD in Linguistics at UT Austin, and I am now a senior learning scientist at Duolingo, a language learning app. I think in my role, and it's probably true for my colleagues, that there really isn't a typical day. And that is something that grad school prepared me for, right? So as a graduate student, I was doing research, but also teaching, mentoring students. I worked in a lab with undergraduate research assistants, so I was also doing mentoring. And so I felt like I was juggling a lot of responsibilities and being pulled in a lot of directions, and that's still true. I work on a lot of different projects. Some of those are very team-based, so I spend a lot of time in meetings, collaborating, brainstorming, giving feedback, and I also do a lot of work individually as well. So quiet time, writing at a computer or researching some particular topic to then contribute to the team brainstorms. And so I think most days are pretty split between the collaborative team meetings and doing individual work, which I really like. Also in my current position, my responsibilities are split between like data and research, more writing-based projects, and other kinds of, maybe you think of them as like new initiatives or things that are more experimental. I do a lot of communicating on social media. So even now there's part of my individual and collaborative work is data, part of it is writing, and part of it is other kinds of communicating. So I think networking is really, really important for learning about how to talk about your skills and experiences, and do a lot of research and reading online to learn about finding examples of how to talk about your skills and experiences, and also to see what the different companies and roles you're applying for, what they look for, how they talk about the work that they do. You can use that to then inform how you'll be talking about it. So there's a couple of things that I didn't do myself and I wish I had, and so I'll share with you now. So one of the things that you can do when you're networking is have informational interviews with people who have similar roles or backgrounds or at a company you're interested in working at. And these are short interviews that allow you to get more perspective and more information about this person's experience, and then you can in turn use that when you shape your own. So one thing you can do is have informational interviews. Something else that's really important is to use the job ads that you find as like an outline, as a guide to the cover letter and maybe the resume and any other materials that you're using to apply. That job ad shows you the priorities that they're interested in, right? Those bulleted lists, really, you can think of it as they're telling you the terminology that they use, the terminology that they would like to see in how you talk about your experience. So really lean into what they're giving you in that job ad to then use that to shape both kind of like the outline of your materials and also very specifically the terminology. And so one example might be that, graduate students at UT, we had titles like AI or TA, and those are all kind of opaque. They don't always really describe what you're doing. And so if you were applying for a teaching role, or any kind of instructional role, you might see that that the job ad calls for instructional design or content development. And so just because UT gave you a contract that said assistant instructor and your tax form said assistant instructor does not mean that you're committed to using that particular phrase to talk about your teaching and instructional design experience. So if you see that something different is used at a company, that you can use that to explain what on earth an assistant instructor is. Another point to make about applying is to do your research on the company and the role, and think about the things that you do as a graduate student and not necessarily the things that you know. So the things that you know certainly can contribute to the kind of work that you want to do, the kind of company, their mission, things like that. But thinking about what your skills are, the things that you do that you want to highlight in your application materials, I think it's useful to think of like what is on your to-do list in a given day or a given week. And it's, in my case, it wasn't anything like understanding bilingualism, right? Like that wasn't the thing on my to-do list. My to-do list probably said things like, find research, synthesize research, develop stimuli. I was doing experimental work, give feedback, revise manuscript. Those are the kinds of things that I was doing that were on my to-do list, and those were my skills and experiences. Research, teach, advise, give feedback, communicate. So think about those as the skills that you have. I often think back to some advice that a friend of mine in psychology gave me after she had graduated and was trying to figure out her own path. And her advice was to try and get an internship while I was still a graduate student. And I think this was great advice because it probably had not crossed my mind that internships are really intended for people who have student status. And so as soon as you graduate, you lose that ability maybe to have like a short-term position that you can kind of dabble and figure out something about the industry, about your own interests. And so I did end up getting an internship with a company in Austin where I worked for 2 summers. And I think, that was useful to me in a couple of ways. One is that I think on paper, it was like a concrete example of a way that I was able to adapt what I knew in, like the context of a graduate degree program to other areas, to other fields, working with this company. So I think, there was kind of on paper, it was evidence that I could do things besides very academic research. But I think the other thing it did was give me like really practical experience about how to talk about what I knew in classroom and lab contexts in a way that made sense and was accessible to people who don't have my background or your background or any background like someone who is getting an advanced degree. And so I think that was good and hard practice to like distill information and assumptions that I had as an experienced researcher and like how to talk about really nuanced topics in a way that again was accessible and made sense to people from all kinds of backgrounds, from business backgrounds, engineering backgrounds, consulting backgrounds. And so for me, an internship was really good. I do think that those experiences were useful, but that's not the only way to get that kind of experience. I think the core of what is really important there is to find ways to connect what your skills are, what your interests are, in ways that are applied kind of, again, outside these like classroom research contexts. And that could be things that you're already doing, if you're involved with community or political organizations or even things on campus, like that kind of event planning and organizing, working across departments. This could be things you're getting paid for. It could be things you're volunteering or part of your service commitments. I think it's important to find ways to show that you have that kind of flexibility and can communicate about things that there is no one who is an expert like you in industry or in these alt-ac positions. So how can you think about how you can demonstrate that, whether it's in some kind of like clearly named position or something like an internship, or if there are other examples in your life and in your career of ways you have worked broadly with many kinds of people who don't have your experience and your expertise.